Okay, when they first said that I was going to, Sister said, everybody's saying, well, you've got to tell everybody what you always said. So I've thought back to some of the things that Sister said, and this is only a couple minutes. I used to say, read every day. Be kind. Help your parents. Say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. We're from the South, and we are known for our gentility and our good manners. And I always feel that it's the obligation of the schools to promote those good manners. Pray every day. I would tell them constantly, obey your parents. Always say please and thank you. And when you don't understand something, for goodness sakes, ask. When you make the sign of the cross, say all the words, in the name of, in the name of, and in the name of. It's in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And of course, you know, we like to go Father, Son, Holy Spirit, which is not exactly the whole meaning of it. Another thing that I always told the children, and I always told the parents too, was if you can think something, you can eventually say it. If you can say it, you can write it. If you can write it, you can read it. And so we constantly talked about things. We wrote things down. We read them, we studied them, and we took those same words home for homework most of the time. Those are, I used to always say tough bananas when they would come and fussing about something. I don't know what it meant other than too bad. So, our beginnings here in northwest Mississippi. 1941, Father Towski, a priest of the Sacred Heart, gave a mission at St. Michael's, Illinois. And there he met a priest from Natchez, Mississippi, Father McCarthy. Father McCarthy was telling Father Towski how badly they needed priests in Mississippi. So Father McCarthy went back to Bishop Giroux, and Bishop Giroux started a conversation with the SCJs about whether or not he could get priests to help out in this mission territory. In January of 42, Father Nolken met with Bishop Giroux, and he was invited to send the priests to Hattiesburg or to Clarksdale. Interesting thing is, that's not where the faculties came for. In August of 42, the bishop sent faculties for Father Flanagan to go to Water Valley. So the priests went to Water Valley. At that time, the few Catholics in Holly Springs had a church, St. Joseph Church, which was a mission of Water Valley. And so that's how that all got started there. Then in 43, the bishop put the Sacred Heart Fathers in charge of Tate, DeSoto, Benton, Tippah, Marshall counties, and DeSoto counties, which is a humongous territory. And it was then that they moved to Holly Springs. At that point, there were known to be 13 Catholics in the greater Holly Springs area, 1 in Hickory Flats, 15 near Coldwater. Father Flanagan was told that as of May 1st, he would be in charge of the new group. A couple months later, Father Saxon was sent to help Father Flanagan. In January of the next year, 44, they went to Memphis for a confirmation. And Father Caldwell of Memphis told about a Catholic family by the name of Johnson, sitting right here, who had taken their baby, this young lady, to Memphis to be baptized. So the priests decided they would have to check this all out. And I believe that your family lived about 2.5 miles or 3 miles from Hernando at that time.
Yes, but actually we lived in Walls with my grandmother because my daddy was still in the South Pacific.
Ah, okay. So actually they were in Walls with Grandma. So Father Flanagan and Father Saxon decided to visit this Mrs. Johnson and find out if this was true or not. Miss Johnson said she knew of at least 7 Catholic families in the Walls area. So that evening already, the priest went to Walls to verify the statement of Mrs. Johnson. In January of that year, Bishop Giroux went, Father Flanagan then wrote the bishop and said, we have found all these Catholics over in the Walls area, and I think we need to do something about it. And so he wrote to the bishop, and the bishop wrote back and said, I found your letter very interesting, especially what you said about Walls. To tell you the truth, I've never heard of the place. So then, in January of that next year, Father Flanagan offered Mass in the home of Joe Harris in Walls. 29 people attended, and that officially became the beginning of the Walls Church. Father Saxon stayed there for 3 days taking a census of the people. They just went up and down and everywhere they could find a home and talked to the people. So in the end, they had found 34 Catholics in the area. So after that, Father Flanagan and Father Saxon made arrangements that they would pick up the Johnson family, and I think there was another family, the Yates, in the Hernando area that were Catholic, and they would take them to Walls with them when they would go to Walls to celebrate Mass in the homes of the people.
They also celebrated in the homes of the people.
Right. And I know that the house that the younger people here might remember as the little white house at school, that was where some of the first Masses were said, in that home. And then back behind us, closer to the railroad track, you know, the school was here and the convent here, and you walked up here to the end of the corner, and there was a big greenhouse, and the McConnells lived there. And there were Masses also said there. Both of those houses are since gone. Both of them destroyed by fire. 44, Father Flanagan started asking the provincial for a church. He wanted a church. The provincial said, good idea. In April of 44, they baptized 4 of the Day children. Some of you knew Hazel Day, the counselor at Sacred Heart. It was 4 of her family that was baptized then. So a lot of names that anybody that went to school or have been surrounded by the area, the Harrises, the O'Donnells, the Days, those were all names that are familiar to some of you.
They were all kin.
That's true. They were all kin. Yes. At school, we knew they were all kin. The Sextons and the Stanfords were the same way. Half the school we thought belonged to that family. In 1944, Patty Harris turned over his gas station in Walls as our first church. It was called St. Joseph Chapel. And that was going to be the temporary church. Then, a couple months later, Patty gave the deed to property right there in Walls. Actually, the filling station was right there, and then over there's the property that he gave for the church. And Catholic Extension Society gave $5,000 towards the building of the church. And I think the church was built for just right around $10,000, which would be amazing today if that could happen. But the Extension Society had a condition under which we could accept the $5,000 for the church. It had to be under roof within a year's time, and it had to be called Sacred Heart Church. So they accepted that. Oh, there was a third condition. There had to be a $25 memorial plate stating that they had been helped by the Extension Society. And that is in the church, or at least it was when we left the church. In August of '44, Father Hogya arrived, and many of the people still remember Father Hogya. The church was dedicated in November of that year, and it poured unmercifully. They said it was a quagmire all around the church. So dear Uncle Mutt Abernathy, who was really not an uncle, but took over a lot of family help and growing and raising of a lot of the children, brought big planks of wood and laid wooden planks around the church for the dedication and the blessing. And of course, as soon as they dedicated the church, the people said, well, we need a school now. You know, today, I don't think that would happen quite so fast. But anyway, they asked for the school, and they started talking about it immediately. The war came in there, so it was a hard time getting materials. First, it was a hard time getting materials for the church, and then it was a hard time getting materials for the school. So they finally got the materials. They were given permission to get the materials for the school. They built the school, and now Father Hogya had another problem. Who do I have for teachers? And they called my community in Milwaukee, and Mother Corona offered that she would send 3 sisters. September 17th of 1947, the school opened with 17 children. Sister Spez taught 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. Sister Joan Habiger taught 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade and was the principal. Yes. There was no convent. The sisters, for a short time, stayed with a family, and then Railroad Alley, which runs back on the back side of the old bank and post office in Walls. Mr. Abernathy had some trolley cars back there and a couple little houses. And so one of the houses was given to the sisters to live in, but they had to go up through the fields, and it was very muddy. Trolley car alley was down sort of like in a ditch, and the church was up on a level. So he cut steps into the side of the ground there and made a wooden, like a bridge from once they got up on top of that land up to the church. And the sisters would come every morning with their bag with breakfast and with lunch. And they would go to church, eat their breakfast, have school, and then they would go home in the evening that way. So that was the very beginnings of the school then. You cannot separate the church from the school. It's one and the same basically. All those years, it worked together for everything. And Holly Springs is very much the same way. Let's see. Oh, the opening of the school was quite interesting. None of the windows were in. They had donated chalkboards, which were not hung. 15 desks had been donated by some school up north, but they had not arrived. So the children brought a kitchen chair from home, and that's what they sat in that first year. During that summer, they hung the chalkboards. They put linoleum on the floor of the 2 classrooms. They put sinks in the bathroom. I don't know what they did that first year. They didn't have sinks, evidently, and the PTO raised money for Venetian blinds for the classrooms. And they bought playground equipment. What I find as a fascinating story of the very first years of Sacred Heart School is that the PTO of the school of Sacred Heart and the PTO of Lake Cormorant School worked together for fundraisers. There was a theater, and they would have dances and movies together to raise money, and then the money was divided among the 2 schools. So in an area where nobody much cared about Catholics, it was interesting to me that those very first years, the public school down the road, not the local one, but the one on down the road at Lake Cormorant, and the Catholic school in Walls did fundraisers together. 1949, we had the first graduation at Sacred Heart. Rosa Harris Pollock, who just died right before the 75th anniversary of the school. She was planning to come. Rose Chimataro, who has since died. Donald Harris and Ted Harris were our first ones. In 1954, that we began a high school, which lasted until 1966, when they built Bishop Byrne in Whitehaven. It was much more financially effective to bus the students to Bishop Byrne than it was to continue to try to run a small high school. Sister Virginia in 1966-67 school year was reassigned from Holly Springs to Walls, and the school really increased immensely while she was there. And she stayed there until she died in 1995. She died of cancer then. She started kindergarten that very year. High school had moved out. We had 4 classrooms. Kindergarten started. Then we moved. Up to that point, there was 1st and 2nd grade in one room, 3rd and 4th in the 2nd room that they had. They had built 3 rooms originally. 5th and 6th was in the 3rd room, and when they decided to have the high school, they added a 4th room to that original school. So that 4th room became 7th and 8th. When the high school left, then they moved out, and we had a full grade of each class. 45 first graders, 45 second graders. 45 was the magic number. State said you couldn't go above it. So that's how it started. When I went, I had 45 first and second graders. That was in 61. Let's see. 72, they began the summer program. That summer program reached into Holly Springs, into Olive Branch, into Tunica. By the time we quit, we were having about 600 students during the summer camp program. And we had lunch programs in the places where the children couldn't come to Walls. Sister was always worried about the children drowning because she knew that so many of them played in the Mississippi River. And every year you always heard about how kids were always drowning. So one of her strongest things in the summer program was they were going to all take swimming lessons. But it took heaven and earth to find a place that would accept black children to swim in their swimming pools. First, what did they call it? The country club, over off of Goodman Road, right across where that hospice is now. There's a hospice there. Well, the Whiteheads lived right on that spot, but to the south of that, there was this country club swimming pool, and they eventually accepted the children at hours when it wasn't open to the public. And dear sweet Sister Virginia sent all the summer school teachers to learn how to swim. And the dear coach said, "Oh, no problem. Just walk right off this diving board and you'll bounce to the top." Yours truly sat at the bottom, and he had to come down and get me. A lot of the school staff worked in the summer program, and sisters from all over the United States of our community came down and worked in the summer program. We slept in lots of strange places, in the chapel, in sleeping bags, under tables, in a workroom. We attempted to put little rolling cots into the rooms that were too small to add another cot, and that didn't work out too well. Then as the parishes around began to start, Hernando was starting in the 50s, Southaven, Olive Branch, all these places, we started bringing the children from all those places. So pretty soon we had children from Hernando, Southaven, Olive Branch, Senatobia, Nesbit. Not too long, and they were coming from Tunica also. And all this time, children were also coming from Memphis, from the Whitehaven area, Robco Lake, Tomco Lake, that area. So we had children just coming from everywhere. Of course, we ran out of space. By the 70s, the late 60s, the 70s, we started buying portable classrooms. We ended up with 9 mobile classrooms, which the given life of a mobile classroom for school is 10 years. The youngest one was into 30 years. That's not saying how long we were in the oldest ones. But at the point at which we could no longer repair them, we had replaced the floor in my classroom. They had replaced windows and window frames in some of the rooms. Then they had to seriously start thinking, we have got to build a new school. We either cut the number way back or build. And Father Gregory Beasy, those of you who knew Father Gregory, he always had this plan for the new school in the back lot, the back of the school. We called it his 33-year plan for the school. It was always going to happen, but it never quite did then. So in the mid-90s, 97 actually, they broke ground for the new school in Southaven, 99. April 15th of 99, we moved in. A big part of the school, at the old school from the late 70s through the 80s and the 90s, was we always had a 10-mile walkathon for St. Jude in honor of Mandy Courts, who Mr. Courts worked at the Southern Missions office, and his little girl Mandy was diagnosed with acute lymphatic leukemia. And so we began walking in her honor and to raise money for St. Jude's, and that was a tradition that never stopped until we moved. We tried mathathons, and that didn't work too well. So that's kind of Sacred Heart and Walls. In the meantime, of course, Hernando is getting a lot of Catholics, and they began having Mass in the Episcopal Church here in Hernando until it burned. Then they celebrated Mass in, let me find Hernando notes. of course, then they went to the courthouse. And that was always, some of the people said, well, the courthouse certainly wasn't designed as a church, but it had pews in it. They did not have to move chairs all the time. And so much of this is a repeat because Hernando, of course, started. It was a mission of walls, eventually. By 1954, there were 15 Catholic families, and the masses were being in a lot of private homes, and it just began, too hard. So then they got permission to use the church, then the courthouse. Then in 1960, they had the groundbreaking for the little church over here. I arrived right after the dedication of that church. Father Jude Blazek celebrated the first Mass in the church on July 2nd of 1961. I dearly loved Father Jude. 61, at the same time that this church was dedicated, Chromecraft Furniture Company from St. Louis built a great big plant in Senatobia. They not only brought workers with them, they brought big Catholic families of workers. The Steinmans, the McNeils, the Shinstocks, yes. Please? Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm. And so, there were so many Catholics all of a sudden. I think it doubled the number of Catholic students at Sacred Heart School because, it was just this influx. Connersman's was another family, the Hoke, something like that. And so they started saying, we need to have church over here in Senatobia now. We've got all these Catholics, and really and truly, this church was too small now, even though it was just dedicated. With that big influx of Catholics, it was too small to do what it was meant to do and to handle. And so in Senatobia, they had Mass in some homes. Then they rented the Latvian Lutheran church and started having Masses in the Lutheran church. By, in 75, May 11th of 1975, the first Mass was celebrated in Senatobia in the rented Latvian church. They began having their own religious education classes and not coming over here to Hernando for that or going to Walls, because prior to that they would go some of them came to Walls, most of them came over here once they got started here. By 1979, Senatobia had 74 registered families. No, Holy Spirit, you all here had 79 registered families and 239 parishioners. 1981, this parish sponsored 2 Vietnamese families. That was the time when a lot of the people were emigrating from Vietnam. If some of you might remember the stories about the boat people. They escaped in small boats. The Chung family and I think the Lee family were sponsored by this parish, and they went to Sacred Heart School. Little Van was in my room, and she did not speak for 2 years from the trauma of the accident. She saw part of her family drown when the boat capsized. Let's see. Oh, by 2000, you all had 212 families here and 530 parishioners. 2007 here was the groundbreaking for this church. By 2008, 289 families with 650-some parishioners. let's see. In 78, back in Senatobia, they bought land for their church, $42,000 for 7 acres. Seems like wonderful nowadays. Then across the way was a 3-bedroom house. They bought that house for the priest to live in, which Father Tony Kelly was the first one, and then I think Ken Stoll. Today, I believe it's social services, food pantry building. By 1978, Senatobia had 35 Catholic families there. In 81, they had groundbreaking for their church, and that church was dedicated in 1985. Tony Troxler said that probably 85 to 90% of that parish is Hispanic now, and very, very active parishioners. I'm saving Holly Springs towards the end, even though it also goes in with all of this. It has a different kind of history. Queen of Peace in Olive Branch. Father Simcox, Claudia Wiseman, and a Lucy Collins did a census in the Olive Branch area, and they found 12 Catholic families. So they began to have Mass in a dance studio above the city cleaners. Next to the city cleaners was a funeral home, which happened to be very convenient. The funeral home let them borrow their chairs. So every Saturday night, they would carry the chairs from the funeral home up the outdoor ladder, stairs, and set them up in the dance hall. Then Sunday they would have Mass, and at the end of Mass, everybody was asked to pick up their chair, take it downstairs, and put it back in the funeral home. It was a nice little place. I liked that place. I'm not sure what they did. A couple of the parishioners built a little tiny altar. They may have had permission to leave it in the dance hall. I don't know. That was at Pigeon Roost and Goodman Road, and today I think that area is called Old Town in Olive Branch. In 1963, they moved into an abandoned gas station. That seems to be a big part of the Southern Mission's northern churches. Either other people's churches or gas stations. I remember that place too. That was also very nice. In 78, Olive Branch Church moved into a multi-purpose building that I called a Quonset hut out on Sandage Road. Father Jack became the first pastor. Well, he became the first resident priest in 1980. It became a church in its own right in 1983. Prior to that, of course, it was a mission of Sacred Heart and Walls, as was Hernando. Father Jack was installed as the first pastor, and then Father Tom Burns followed him. In 1998, they dedicated the current church. I don't know what the population is of that church, but I know that I felt like it was way too small for the number of parishioners by the time they dedicated it. And I know at one point there was a talk about building another church, and you know how things go. Christ the King was established as a mission of Walls in 1966. Mass was celebrated in the car auction barn on Highway 51 between Church Road and Goodman Road. We used to have a joke every year at First Communion. Are we going to have our First Communion procession around a station wagon, around a sedan, or around a pickup? Again, it was a matter of the parishioners had to set up chairs and take it all apart, of course, after Mass every week. The first church was built on 12 acres on State Line Road in 1969. That is currently that little college. I've forgotten the Delta. Is it Delta College? Whatever it is over there.
Life Springs.
Life Springs?
It is what it is.
Okay. Then Father Mike McMillan was assigned pastoral ministry there. And when it was dedicated in 69, it was dedicated in 69 by Bishop Brunini. So we had Bishop Giroux from the very beginning of Southern Missions interactions with this part of the country until about that time when Bishop Brunini took over. It was over 30 years that Christ the King stayed over there on State Line Road. During that time, towards the end of the years over there, they hired Sister Josephina Molina, and she worked with Sister Helen Pisers, who had retired and come to live with us at Walls, and they began ministry among the Hispanics who were beginning to move into the area. And I remember the first Our Lady of Guadalupe procession and the services they had, and that was something that was controversial at the time. A lot of people trying to say, oh no, there aren't any there. I remember calling the diocese at that time. There aren't any Hispanics up there. I said, then you're buried your head in the sand, because they are. In the year 2002, they broke ground for the new big church they currently have over on Church Road. And I don't know, again, what the population is. I know there are lots and lots of people in that church. Do you know offhand?
On any given Sunday, somewhere around 800 families. 800?
Ooh, 800 families about. Good Shepherd Church. Of course, Good Shepherd St. Anthony's started in 1971. They had their first Mass in an old house. In 77, they started in the storefront, which had been an old liquor store. So we went from gas stations to liquor stores. 79, they bought a home, which they purposely only barely renovated. They took out one wall, but they wanted to make sure that if they were ever able to have a permanent church, that they would be able to sell that house back as a private home, which is exactly what they did. Then in 2010, Sacred Heart Church and St. Anthony's in Tunica merged, became Good Shepherd Church in Robinsonville, and we've been there since 2010. Holly Springs has a fascinating history, and I get all bogged down in all the dates and the historical, and it's again connected with the Episcopalians. Hernando here worked with the Episcopalians in their church. In 1852, the Mississippi Railroad built a big repair shop, etc., in Holly Springs. They moved their train to Water Valley. Then a great big iron foundry came in. With the railroad came a lot of Irish Catholics. They started having a lot of Catholics over there then in Holly Springs. And Bishop Elder was the Bishop of Mississippi at that time. And he wrote a letter to the priests at St. Peter's in downtown Memphis. Would they please help a little bit with these Catholics that were in this place called Holly Springs? So Father Grace from Memphis came down, he met with the Catholics, and they bought the Episcopalians' first church, what they called their little church. They had built that in 1839, and so that was Christ Church, and the Catholics bought that. They moved the church 2 blocks down where we took it over then in the 40s. Well, in between that, of course, came the Civil War, which devastated Holly Springs. And we have famous battles. After the Battle of Shiloh, wounded soldiers were sent to Holly Springs. Then a lot of the federal soldiers were brought into Holly Springs. The poor priest couldn't keep up with ministering to the dying soldiers. So he wrote to Bishop Elder down in Natchez and said, "Help, help, help. I can't take care of all these dying soldiers." So the bishop came up to help out. At that time, the Union soldiers came into Holly Springs. They occupied Holly Springs for about 10 years. One of the Confederate leaders decided that they were going to attack the Union soldiers in Holly Springs, which was a horrible nightmare. It did not turn out well for anybody. And in revenge, the Union soldiers were let loose on the people of Holly Springs, killed many of them, ransacked and burned homes, desecrated St. Joseph's Church. And even to this day, in the floor, there are bayonet holes where the soldiers jammed the floors with their bayonets. Then after that came the yellow fever, and Father Oberti was the priest there at that time, and there were 15 Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, Kentucky, had a girls' school called Bethlehem Academy. Father Oberti and the sisters decided to stay and help take care of the patients, the yellow fever people. Eventually, Father Oberti died, and then one by one, 6 of the sisters died. 33 of their parishioners died. And after the yellow fever was over, Holly Springs lost most of its population. Most of the Catholic population left the area, those that had survived. And so then there's not too much history of the Catholic Church in that area until a good bit later. Let's see. In 1866, there were 33 Catholics in the area again, and they wrote the bishop and said, sorry. That was before the Bethlehem Academy, before the yellow fever. In 1896, it became a mission of Water Valley, which is exactly how the Sacred Heart Fathers enter then in the early 40s. They go to Water Valley one year, and then they go to Holly Springs. By 1942, the Catholics were beginning to recover in Holly Springs. And so, of course, as soon as there were very many children, they wanted a school. Father Paul Frichtel bought a old, I think it was an old antebellum Turner Lane house, which had been one of the houses that they had used for the academy. And he bought that, and Mr. Fred Williams then started St. Mary's School. And he was the lone teacher in 48. 49, 4 of the school sisters from my community in Milwaukee went to Holly Springs, and Sister Julene over here and Sister Ramona Ann are in Holly Springs now. They've been there almost as long as I've been here. So when in 49 then they the sisters came, and then they added the missing grades, and every year after that they added a high school grade, because the original school only went to 8th grade. By 54 they had a full-blown the first high school graduation. And of course, due to the laws in Mississippi in the 40s, any school, any church had to be segregated. And so in Holly Springs, we had St. Mary's for the African American students. In 51 or 52, Sister Juanita, who had been at St. Mary's, then went over. Sister Juanita and Sister Virginia, Geronima at the time. Sister Virginia went over and started the St. Joseph's School, and that was the school for the white children. Those of you who remember Miss Beverly, she was one of the early students there. She had come back to live with her mother by that time. And she was one that when they went to high school, they said, oh, you went to that Catholic school, you can sit by this was the first year of integration, and they said, you can sit by this student, you know. They wouldn't ask anybody else to sit by the black student who was there. Then in 69, St. Joseph and St. Mary's merged under a new name as Cadet, which was an acronym for Christian Aided Development Through Extraordinary Training. For a couple years, well, that was 69. In 1974, the old St. Joseph School opened as Cadet Child Care Center. Sister Ramona Ann, didn't you start that? Yes. Okay. She started that. And in 1995, the name was again changed to Holy Family. I've always felt sorry for Holly Springs. They had an identity crisis, I guess. St. Mary, St. Joseph, Cadet, Holy Family. I know when we built the new school here, they said, maybe we should change the name. We kept saying, no, please don't change the name. In 1981 in Holly Springs, the old 1939 Episcopal Church, which was now St. Joseph's Church, they had the last Mass in the old St. Joseph's Church and built their new church. And the new church is built directly on the spot where the original St. Joseph also started in an old antebellum mansion. And they tore that mansion down to build St. Joseph's, the current church. Around the 1995, the old St. Joseph Church was repaired, and it is now a yellow fever church and museum. And I would encourage all of you to go to Holly Springs and visit it. It's a small church. The sanctuary part has the altar and vestments of the time, etc. Where the choir used to be, they have a bedroom, a nursing room, a clinic that they used during the yellow fever epidemic. There are a lot of artifacts of the history of Holly Springs, a lot of artifacts from the yellow fever in that church. If it's locked, go next door to the right, and the family that lives there, if they're home, has a key. Sister Ramona Ann has a key to the Yellow Fever Museum and Church. The lady next door is wonderful. Sister Rose and Diane, who's over here somewhere, and I stopped there a couple weeks ago after a meeting in Holly Springs, and the neighbor came out and said, "Oh, did you want to see the museum?" And we said, oh, yes, we would love to. So she opened up for us, and she said, we just kind of take care of it. We'll just make sure that we keep an eye out. If it looks like there's anybody who wants to see it, they'll come and open it up for you. And it is worth it. From the historical point of view, from a church point of view, that church still stands, built in 1839. It was first Christ Church for the Episcopalians, until they built the great big church that they now have across the street from where Sister Ramona and Sister Julene live. And it served very well through from the 40s all the way through into 81 for the Catholics of Holly Springs again. And now it is a museum. So that's what I can tell you about the churches and the schools.